Welcome everybody. I'm going to call this meeting to order of the Planning and Advisory Board of Satellite Beach. It's Monday, October 21st, 2019, 7 p.m. in our typical fashion with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a few items to discuss tonight. I'm going to go slightly out of order just because two of them are pretty closely related, but there's a third I think we can probably move through pretty swiftly first. So the first item is going to be PAB number 05-19. It's the vacation of the easement on 692 North Hedgecock Square. Carl, we want to give us a brief summary of this one?
In 2019, the owners of the property purchased the property with the pool encroaching in the 7.5 easement along looking towards the north property line by 1.9 feet. And the pool deck itself was encroaching 7.5 feet into that easement. What they are asking is that we grant vacation of the easement. They went through the process of going through all the utilities, P&L, the city, any other stakeholders in those easements, and they were granted a 7.5 vacation on that easement because it was never being used apparently. That is what they're asking for because they would like to rebuild their screening enclosure. That's another process that will come back for variance as well, but I see no reason not to grant this vacation of easement.
Now, quick question: how many have you done research on that? How many of these types of situations are there in the city, or do they just come up whenever somebody encounters them?
The same day that I received this application for a permit, I got another one doing the same thing, and they're working on their vacation of easement now. We vacated several of them in the past. You look in our files, and the vacations are over the place. I'm not sure what happened back there. This particular property, I actually looked at the building permit application, the drawings that they said were what they were going to use, and it worked. It was supposed to be where it was at. And we get out there, and apparently, I don't know what happened. It's way over here now. So there's more out there, and I see them all the time going through the files.
How many have already come through? You said we had done this before, but like just once.
I think I've done 3 vacations, and we've had some that the stakeholders will not vacate the property. The stakeholders want you to vacate the minimum amount of property in that easement, so they still have some sort of rights in that area. But in this case, there's nothing going back there. It goes back to a canal, and if the easement was platted, but it had never been used. There's no reason for it to be used, so that's why they got a pretty easy take on. It only took them 4 weeks to get paperwork back from the utilities and other stakeholders.
Okay.
So we recommend that you approve it.
Any questions on this from the board?
Carl, you said they're going to rebuild the street, and that'll come under a separate variance of.
Yeah, we'll have to get a variance too. It's a double-edged sword for them.
Is that because they're changing it, or?
It's because they're taking it down. Once you take it down, it has to go back with a permit, so that we can't allow it to be on the property.
Right.
So
Okay.
They'll need a variance.
Same footprint than anticipated.
Yeah, that's what we're running.
And all of these, the stakeholders, they're all notarized.
Right.
You have those.
That was my next question. Exactly.
Because it's a fairly expensive application process for them. You have to get all the information from the utilities, get their blessings, and then they have to pay for certified mail to radius of 500 people in the area, around their property. So they've got to pay for that expense as well, and certify a return receipt. So it comes up to several $100 for something really they did not do. It wasn't their fault.
Yeah. Is the property survey updated at that point, or is it just basically amended?
We have a new survey, yes.
Okay. I recommend to approve.
Okay. We're going to consider that a motion?
Our motion, sorry.
Formal motion to recommend the approval of the vacation.
And I'll go ahead and second it.
Okay. To get that. Peter was the one that made the motion. I'd open it up to any public comment on this issue. Hearing none, I would, maybe we can go ahead and pull the board.
Okay. Stephen Terry?
He's the one that's out.
Oh. He is out.
Yeah.
Rebecca Van Meter? Aye. Paul Marchese?
Aye.
Alan Lamott?
Aye.
Peter Schiffett?
Aye.
And David Dwell.
Aye. Great. Our next order of business is to discuss and make recommendations to the approval of the conceptual plan, PCN 3 at the Pelican Coast North. We have the memo at this point, and you can see the plans up on the walls. Want to take us through this one again, Carl?
Okay, well, we have a little bit of presentation, just so we can disseminate some information out to the public and the board as well. We have submitted a memo outlining what they had done and how they had gotten there and what they had to do to get there. I won't go through this because this goes through quite a bit in our PowerPoint presentation. I kind of used the memo as an outline for our presentation. It takes a minute or two.
Sure.
But what we were doing, we have 27 acres, it's at 27.44 acres, out on the north end of town, as part of the PUD, Plan Unit Development. It was basically established back in 2000, the PUD was. 2004, excuse me, they added these sub-districts in the zoning classifications of the PUD as a whole, so they could limit and regulate what was going to be developed in this property. For example, we have PCN1, which is single-family residence, PCN2, which is single-family townhome residence, and then PCN3 was medium-density, which is condominium, 85-foot tall condominiums, and that density is much greater there. Okay. I'm just going to ramble through this here. Thank you. PCM, the Pelican Coast North Conceptual Plan Development Plan. Liz, can you do me a favor and just, is there someone, there we go. Pelican Coast was created by adoption ordinance 788 in August of 2000. It consists of 240 acres, that's the entire PUD, Plan Unit Development. That's when the city annexed that property into the city. The development regulations for PCM were adopted in ordinance 877 back in April 2004, establishing minimum requirements for sub-districts within the PUD, not only for PCM3, but PCM1, PCM2, and PCM1, PCS1, and PCS2. Too many PCS. This is just kind of give you an idea of what the people before us, the people that planned this out, what they wanted in these particular designations in the PUD. PCN1, they wanted to have single-family residence. This is at the farthest west section of Montecito. Those are the Montecito estate homes, single-family. Next one, please. These are the regulations that they adopted. Basically, lot area, setbacks, maximum building height. All these things, I think there's one more slide on that one. Okay, no. But those are the regulations that were established to figure out how many of these units you can get in there. We'll get to that in just a moment. PCM2, Pelican Coast North, was single-family townhomes, and those are being developed now. Not being developed, they're being built right now. And that's what the density they wanted in those. And then we have these regulations these are the regulations for these homes. And those limit the number of these townhomes we can put in. For example, right now, the not PCM, but the PCM2, and this is Montecito Phase 2C, it calls for 150 townhomes. We have a bunch of other ones in there. But the PC3 was medium density multifamily according to the plan you developed in Pelican Coast. They wanted to put medium density, they wanted to put some bigger buildings and have higher density out by A1A. These are those regulations that they enacted. And we see large sites. And go ahead. And this is where we came up with PCM1, which is south single family, PCM2, which is townhomes, PCM3 is for medium density, high-rise apartments, high-rise condominiums. Can you go back to it for 1 second? Everything on both sides is shear water. Shear water is a snake that goes up through the middle here. Everything on the left side and the right side is part of the planning and development. I mentioned that because it comes up later. But it's 248 acres. We have 27 acres we are dealing with today in PNC 3. We have 2 projects on the Warrenton Island that are being addressed. The development of the units in the residential units in PCM 3, Pelican Coast North, and a separate item that deals more with the PUD, but is in this conceptual plan, development of commercial use within the planned unit development. And that's planned unit development as a whole. Development of residential units in PNC 3, Pelican Coast North. This is the section density. We're going to talk a little bit about density and how we got to this point. Section 3903 PUD, residential planned unit development. Size and dimensions, maximum density. We have a comprehensive plan as well that mirrors with, it doesn't mirror, it's a sister to your zoning map. And this comprehensive plan, this is what the future land use is designated for. And basically, comprehensive plan use, designation of governing the maximum density permitted for the overall bulk of the PUD. This is the whole 248 acres. Okay, the entire PUD is 248 acres, like I've been battling on. The comprehensive plan designates the land of the PUD as MURLA PUD, which is mixed-use residential, low A density planning and development. A lot of limited commercial use and 1 to 6 units per acre. This is right out of the code. Assuming we use a maximum number of units allowed in the PUD, we have 240 acres times 6 units per acre. We have a maximum density of 1,488 residential units for the PUD as a whole, separated all out through the area. Okay, adopting the regulations in the sub-districts for PCM 1, PCM 2, PCM 3 define the density of the districts and limited the overall density of the PUD. There's PCM 1, they won't have single-family housing. So the number of houses, that is a built-out subdivision, that's done. You go out there and count all the houses out there, and you come up with the density of PCM 1. Somewhere along the way, figured, with all the restrictions that we have, please do this next line. Yes, with the allotted acreage established for PCM 3, the heights and lengths of buildings thus dictated the density of PCM 3, limited by setbacks, heights, buildings, green space, regulation code. They came up to the cram 398 residential units in PCM 3 with the building heights of 85 feet, the amount of acreage they had to use, and the size of lots that had to be on each unit. So that's where we got the 398. I was about that myself coming into the project. But that's how it's kind of reverse density. Most of our zoning districts, we set out a limited amount of density. In RM3, we have a limited amount of density per acre. So this, it goes wrong there. This was a planning unit development. It's planned. We planned it, and then we subdivided it, and we planned some more. And this is how we came up with 398 units. As indicated by the original plan of PCA was for the construction of 17 multi-family, multi-story building condominiums. The developer would like to deviate from this original plan and add an element of single-family residential units. PCA 3 will remain consistent with the overall plan. Then on to the next one. What they'd like to do is add PCN 1, the regulations that we have in PCN 1, and add the PCN 3, allowing both activities. Both activities are approved from the PUD, and this would accommodate their desired conceptual change. These are the proposed changes we need to make in PCM 3, the code, to accommodate this. This is basically a mirror image of PCM 1. We just dropped in this information because it's already okay over here. Let's bring it over here. These are the rest of the units. This place goes over here. The proposed deviation concept is why the applicant is here. If the applicant just went straight on and said, we're going to build 17 85-foot tall condominiums, we're not here today, because he didn't change anything. The concept was already there. He would just go to engineering and start figuring out his drawings. By deviating from the original design, the density was changed from 398 residential units down to 298. Because we're putting over 70 single-family residents in there, and getting away from 14 of the high-rise towers. Just some facts out there, the minimum impact fees to the developer will be estimated to be $2 million. Impact fees for Park County for improvement or transportation, education, solid waste, and most other items. That money ever gets there, we'll see. The nice thing about this project is the sanitary sewer impact fees are collected by the city of Cocoa Beach. Thus not adding stress to the already overburdened county facilities. Cocoa Beach has a capacity of an additional 1.2 million gallons per day. The estimated additional capacity of this project is 83,950 gallons. So Cocoa Beach has plenty of volume to take as and don't burden the county. All sanitary lines will be placed new, nothing will be left out on that property. All those 1950 sewer lines will be removed from the property. Additionally, ad valorem tax revenue just for the project will increase revenue by an estimated $1.6 million per year. Just information. The environmental condition of proposed development. The development has had a full phase 1 environmental site. They're good ones to look at, it's right here. And a limited phase 2. This was requested by the city, the level 2 environmental site assessment conducted by University of Engineering Sciences. This is not our information, it's information we got from this company. Basically, level 2, it dealt with gasoline, kerosene, and none of that was exceeded the allowable limits in that property. The PFOAs and the PFOSs use activity groundwater with concentration between 27.7 and 130 nanograms per liter. Okay, the concentration of the PFOAs and PFOSs is consistent with the similar samples taken by applied ecology. Those people. Throughout the county in December of 2018. They did those tests for the county. The water that's tested is groundwater. This groundwater is not used in our drinking water. Our drinking water for City of Satellite Beach comes from Lake Washington. It does not affect that. Which just adds up again, information I received, the Department of Health recommends drinking water no more than 70 nanograms per liter. Before demolition of the former military housing, and asbestos remediation was formed. We made new author and analyzed all those buildings, those duplex, we knew there was asbestos out there, so they had to do asbestos remediation. And they performed asbestos remediation, we have those files as well. The land use of these parcels have always been residential. No commercial, industrial, or military operations other than housing have ever existed on the site. That takes away a lot of possibilities. We're not blowing things up there, we're not having a tanker site there, so there's little chance of contamination there. Okay, this is the second one in our agenda item, development of commercial use within the planning and development. And this is again, like our code, PUD, planning unit development, commercial use, commercial area, maximum total development area in the PUD. This is in the big 248 acres. 5% of the overall area of the PUD. PUD, like which 240 acres, allows for a total of 5% commercial use. 240 acres times 5% is 12.4 acres of commercial use. The proposed commercial use within the conceptual plan consists of 4.77. We go to the next one. In 2015, the comprehensive plan land use element was amended by Board of 1103, allowing hotels, similar entities in the commercial use line. Commercial use, so not rezoning anything. These are commercial uses within the PUD as well as other commercial areas. The proposed hotel within the conceptual plan, 4CM3 is a commercial use permitted by both the comprehensive plan and the PUD regulations. It is not part of the residential unit development of the conceptual plan. Thus, it's not considered a density of the project. It's commercial use as a whole for the PUD. Okay, the above reference development, they have to meet the requirements set out in section 3907, conceptual plan. We actually have our code. This is how you have to do conceptual plan. This is how you have to come bring it to the city. They have, along with the other requirements of section 3904, which is still along with PUD, and those are the general conceptual plan requirements. They have met those, and staff is recommending that this application is in harmony with the requirements of this particular code section. Also required by 904.C, reviewed by planning advisory board while we're here, and city council, except for plan, review aside each to be submitted to PAB for review. And we are recommending that this gets the board approved. And that's a long-winded little thing. We have questions?
I'm sure. Go ahead, Paul.
So, Carl, by adopting the conceptual change, you're reducing the residential units from 398 to 219?
That's correct.
And the total amount of residential units is 1,488?
That's for the entire PUD,
The
248 acres.
The
North and south, Shearwater is all,
PCN 1, PCN 2, PCN 3?
yeah, PSC 1, too many PC.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's right, it's a
Everything
PCN,
south of Shearwater is also part of the PUD.
and that, so all inclusive is 1,488 residential units.
Residential units.
So my question is, before, when it was owned by the Air Force or Navy, who owned
That was
that?
the military.
Military. How many units were there?
There were over 1,000.
Was it close to the 1,488?
I don't know the exact numbers, but I know there were more than 1,000 units in just that side of the building, of the north side of Shearwater. in that area.
And the sewer collected was also connected to Cocoa Beach when the military was using it?
Yes. Because the military, my understanding of it is the military built the base. They were using Cocoa Beach as their sanitary facilitator. And so when they started developing housing, they just kept on going.
And the incoming water, drinking water
Is Melbourne.
is Melbourne. And it was Melbourne back when the military owned it as well?
I believe so, yeah. We've had Melbourne Water pretty much been the provider for, I don't know how long, but.
So basically, so that I understand correctly, when the military owned it, there was over 1,000 residential units.
Easily over 1,000.
And the town of Satellite was able to sustain that type of amount of people.
Correct. Because the property we're discussing right now was being fully utilized as rental property by a company. And then the developer bought that property out and demolished the house because they were way past their prime. And the development is there. That's what they.
Just one last question. How do you define residential units when you talk in a hotel?
We don't. They're not involved.
So-
That's the concept I was trying to bring around, that the hotel in the PUD as a whole
Right.
is not residential units. Okay, it's transient. Okay, we're not having people live there, going to our schools, those type of things. They're not included in the density because it's part of a commercial entity within the PUD as a whole, which is part of that 12.4 acres of commercial use they can do.
We made that distinction, Jim LaRue, for the record, a couple of years ago when we did the commercial. And by having in the commercial definition hotels, then you do not consider them residential density. So even though they're units, don't confuse them with residential because they're not density.
Right, and I understand what you're saying, but you're still gonna have that influx of.
Yeah, you're going to have impact. I know
Yeah.
you don't have impact, but as far as density is concerned, you don't subtract that from the total amount of density, residential density.
Those units that, I mean, it's essentially for this particular piece of land that's under consideration in this conceptual plan of the reduction in the number of units that would potentially have been able to be built on that, is taking that same calculation with 1,488 residential units in the PUD as a whole. Is there any opportunity to move those into another part of the PUD, or is it pretty much just because their intensity is going to be
I
low?
mean, it's very possible. And by utilizing, by only putting in 217 residential units in PCM 3, that allows those are banks, you're defining the density in PCM 3 by what you go there. You know, they could go up to 398, it chose me to go 217, so if we reduce the density, that's density they can use other places.
for PCN 1 and PCN 2, do you know how many units per acre it is? I don't remember if I saw that.
I believe it's 5, they're allowed 1 to 6 in that whole area. So I believe the number I found out was 5.
Okay. Any other questions from?
Sure. In terms of impact fees, how is the hotel calculated compared to residential? And I understand.
Maybe even one moment, I can grab that document and I can explain to you.
Well, I'm just curious, right? So commercial from a monetary standpoint, right?
Right, let me grab that piece of paper.
And I don't know if everybody knows Jim LaRue, but if you want to introduce yourself, I'm sorry, I realize you're still up there.
Thank you, David. And Jim LaRue, I do some of the planning for the city for a number of years, and some of you I recognize from when you were 1 board versus 2 boards versus 1. And I'm here just to kind of give some backup in terms of the comprehensive plan. One thing that is important to remember is you remember a few years ago, hotels were added to the commercial use, and that's part of what's going on now.
Was there a specific project that was brought? Was that the property on
A
DeSoto?
couple of years ago, we did start doing that. It was involving this property, I do believe. I don't know, that was, in the planning concern, could be anywhere, but I think it wasn't an issue because we started on this property before, I believe.
Yeah.
When, a couple of years ago?
No, it was in 2015, if I remember.
Oh,
My
okay.
recollection was that,
The
but,
one on DeSoto?
yeah, no, this was still for this area.
Okay.
It's before that. It was before the one on DeSoto, I think
Okay.
where Devils is now. My understanding is the way it went, there was a couple different people that approached the city about potentially putting it in because at that time, it wasn't one of the allowed uses. We made that change at that point to indicate that the city would be open to something.
And remember, the comp plan is where you do it first, and then the
Right.
supplemental is the zoning, so that was why we made the change of the commercial.
Okay. Single family, this is an estimate from the developer. Single family, 72 times $9,783 per unit, comes out to $704,000 and some change. The condos, 147 at $404,563 a piece, comes out to approximately $671,000. The hotel, 22 units at 2,766 is $614,000. So does that answer a question?
Sort of, I guess where I was going was, in terms of actual impact that a hotel would have versus, let's say, retail as commercial.
Correct.
Right.
And
A hotel's going to have more impact.
Right.
Right, so is the rate differently? Is it rate different
Yeah.
for that?
Yeah, they have
Hotel
different-
versus,
Right.
you know, retail store.
I looked at this way, a couple of these impact fees, they have things listed out as like hotels. You know, those impact fees are X amount of dollars for their sewer. And, yeah, if you put retail in, you would definitely not have the same impact, because you would
Right.
not have all of the restrooms, all the water usage, you'd have a retail place. And that is something that can be developed somewhere else in the PUD.
Well, we're talking impact fee, what you just mentioned are for sewer and water, right? But
Sewer, water.
in
school,
theory, impact fees should cover some other things,
That's right.
whether that,
Impact fees, but they're impacting our world, so they need to pay for it.
right.
How many rooms in the hotel?
222.
Is that correct? Okay. It's
Yeah,
somewhere. I
the
thought.
Footprint on the hotel is 4.7 acres of the 28.
Yes.
Okay. Is that, when you're figuring density for the area minus the hotel, are you including that hotel in that density number?
No, that is not an issue in density, or in commercial use.
So if we're allowed, or the site is allowed 5% commercial, right, of the whole
That's the entire PUD,
two-
not just the PNC one.
Are any of the facilities south of Shearwater currently considered in that commercial calculation?
No, they have strictly, you have the military, rented homes, and then you have PCN one, single family, PCN two, townhomes, and this.
Yeah, there's just those, there are probably military offices, and there's a,
There's actually still government-owned properties in the community.
those are government.
Some of the ball fields are still owned by the military.
Okay, understood, okay. I just want to make one statement, so at 4.77 acres of the 12.4 allowed, you know, that's proportionally, that's a large chunk of the allowable.
It is a large chunk, but they, you know, they're taking it first, I guess. You know, they're proposing to use 4.77 acres, but it leaves over half, almost 2/3 of that back to whoever else develops the rest of the property. So, I mean, you would assume that, I would assume that, you know, they're gonna be kind of highly, you know, utilize this commercial area, you know, for what they want, what they think they can sell, and they can sell a hotel, and it takes
Yeah,
those
of course,
days to build a hotel. We don't have language in our development plan, in our PUD, that says where that commercial use has to be.
No, yeah, understood.
And who gets to use it.
Understood.
Does bring up an interesting point about the other pieces of land up there that are still government-owned. Is there any indication or plan for what is gonna happen with those? Are they still being utilized? I mean, I know some of those ball fields are in pretty
The
rough
ball
shape.
fields are actually, the city is in communication with the military, state owns the ball fields, because they need ball fields, because we have adult kickball. And, not just for that, I'm just kidding. But we have a need for ball diamonds and recreation area. And we, you know, by taking away Soto Park, you know, we made it better, I think. But we took away that field, those fields over there, and we utilized some of the area in the PC, in the part that is owned by Hunt, which is people that run the military housing. It's not military housing, it's geared towards the military. But no, the city would like to take over some of the ball fields.
Any other questions from the board at this point? We'll have more opportunity to discuss further, but we want to open it up. Is there people in particular, a developer here, to make some comments? And
Yes.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Joe Mayer. I'm with Mayer Engineering Group, 100 Parnell Street in Merritt Island. I'm serving as the project engineer for the project. The applicant has a team of folks here to answer your questions. Traffic engineer, the builder, contractor, and the project manager representative are all here. Mike Jaffe, Adam Fatio-Bean, and George Galen. So we're prepared to answer any questions. I can do another presentation, but a lot of the material I have was covered in Carl's presentation, so I don't want to take your time unless you'd like to see it. But I'm prepared to answer any questions you have.
yeah, no, I mean, if I think he did a decent job of summarizing what the conditions are, I just as soon move on to public comment and, you know, the back and forth that we can have there. So thank you for being here, and we reserve our right to ask you some more questions shortly here.
Yeah, I think at some point we want to talk, if appropriate, specifics of the plan.
Yeah.
Versus the general.
Yeah, no, for sure, and that's exactly what, if you have any questions like that, we should bring that up. If you will have something, you know, to summarize anything different than what Carl had to say, then we can definitely hear that now. Alternatively, so you think you did an accurate job representing what the project is? Okay, good. Well, what I want to do is open it up to public comment, and if there's anybody that would like to say something, please, one at a time, of course, when you come up to the podium, state your name and your address, and then we try to limit it to 3 minutes of discussion. And so, anybody who would like to ask any questions, state your opinions about this project. Come on up here.
Hello, board. It's been a while since I've seen you. Dale Abrams, Satellite Beach. I live in the CRA, and I know you all remember me because of the coastal construction control line, okay? You know, growth is great, as long as it's planned appropriately. You guys are talking about water, sewer, what about roads, police, fire, traffic? Are we equipped for that, as far as that's concerned? And I think you need to discuss that a little bit going forward, because we are growing. You know, I don't know if any of you have been out on A1A and see what's going on with traffic as far as that's concerned. And, you know, we need to be able to accommodate this growth properly. And then I don't know what Hunt Pinnacle is going to be doing with that land going into the future as far as that's concerned. I think it's great that we're going to generate 1.6 million in tax revenue for the city of Satellite Beach. So maybe at some point we could see our millage rate go down. I know it went down a little bit in this last budget. I think it was like 0.1%. And I know that property values are going up. So, you know, I'd like to hear a little bit more about, you know, will the schools be able to accommodate this influx of people, or are we getting all retired people? I don't know. We might be getting families, you know, the police and the fire, and how that's going to impact our city, because we're probably going to have to bring on more people to accommodate that. The hotel thing, I'm not quite sure about that yet. I got to think about that a little bit more as far as that's concerned. And the other question is the condos, the 3 buildings that you're talking about, they're allowed to go up to 65 feet? 85 feet. Okay, so we're also looking at increasing the height on the west side of A1A from 35 feet to 45 feet. I believe the city is looking at putting together a referendum for the voters to vote on that. And I just want all of you that are in this room and that are listening to me, when you drive down A1A, get a visual, okay? Think of Hollywood, Florida, Fort Lauderdale, some of those places where you got this tunnel of buildings, and think about whether that's what we really want to see in this wonderful community, as far as that's concerned. So I know we can't do anything about the height in this project. They're allowed to do that, okay? So 85 feet would be just as high as Oceana, am I correct? And that would be 3 buildings? Oh, Oceana is 96 feet? Okay, so, and that would be 3 buildings that would be on the A1A side.
The west.
West side.
The
West side.
West side.
Yes, yes, it would be on the, okay, yes, you're right, okay, as far as that's concerned. And then the rest of the single-family homes will be on the north side of the property and the west side of the property, correct? The way I looked at it from here.
That's why I said west.
Yeah,
West
yeah,
side.
I'm trying to get, you know, my bearings here. So, you know, think about the impact it will have on the community. You know, we can all speak out as far as how we feel, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Okay, so, you know, we can speak out. I went to some of these meetings in the past when this was going on, and a lot of people were not paying attention. And, you know, the only concern I have is infrastructure and traffic, okay, and the accommodation as far as that's concerned. And I don't know if Shearwater is going to be enlarged to maybe 4 lanes versus 2 lanes at some point from A1A to South Patrick. I don't know if South Patrick is going to be enlarged going down the road into the future, you know, as far as that's concerned. So it's something to think about, but it's a done deal, people. It's done.
I didn't, may I?
Yeah.
Traffic was addressed. We have a traffic study that they had done. I don't have it with me. I think we brought some with us, but there was a traffic study done. They had concurrency. permits from the county for the schools. They can accommodate the number of children that are coming in. These are all concurrency things that they had to get so that they could go where we're going now, down the road. They had to know that these services were, going to keep up, and they are going to keep up according to the schools, water. So,
On the conceptual plan, it does say that there's two proposed driveways or entrances, more likely exits on A1A, both right turn only because of the median that's on A1A coming out of that. I don't know if that's something you can speak of. Obviously, it's a projection or a proposal that the FDOT is going to have a lot to say about, but assuming that those did not happen, knowing how the FDOT can be somewhat reluctant to add more egress onto their roads, what did they say the impact was engaged based purely on entering and exiting from Shearwater, right?
Right. They have some work to do in terms of getting their permits and their plans approved by FDOT. So the plan now is to have exit off of A1A2 of them and right turns, and then come in the main entrance on Shearwater.
Okay. Anything else?
This would be the entrance for both the hotel and for the residences?
Correct.
Okay.
They separate as soon as they get inside.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, the reason that the note was on the drawings is that northernmost entrance, the engineers have concerns that DOT is going to have issues with that northernmost entrance. Originally, we were thinking perhaps right in or maybe just right out at that location. It's almost guaranteed. I'm never going to say guaranteed with DOT, but DOT virtually has to give us a minimum of one entrance along there in order for us to access our project. Now, they may say, hey, we want it here, but we want you to move it over here, but they're going to give us at least one entranceway off A1A plus the one on Shearwater. We also have the note on the plans that for emergency access, the back way in where we connect up with Montecito, there's several streets there that can connect. If the CDD will allow it, there's a whole agreement out there that we'd have to go through, but if the CDD will allow it, we'll have an emergency access there. The last thing I'd like to mention about DOT, just one more thing. What we're hoping to do with this project, and the hotel is a big part of this, and it's on the drawings, etc. And we have to work with DOT on driveways, beautification, and this pedestrian overpass. We're really wanting to create a pedestrian overpass over A1A in order to allow patrons of the hotel, people that come down Shearwater, and it'll be public and private use, but we're hoping to accomplish all of that in a large negotiation with DOT during the final design phase, assuming we can get approval here for the conceptual.
Yeah. All right, great, thank you. Yeah, sure.
My name is Martha Godby. I live in Satellite Beach.
I'm sorry, just say it right in the microphone.
Hi,
so
I'm
we can get
Martha
it on record.
Godby, and I live in Satellite Beach. In regards to the crossover and the way that people are going to have to make a U-turn, the way it is on your plans, the crossover is specifically by the hotel for guests of the hotel only, even though he just said it's going to be public use. Will there not be a wall there so that how are the public that are going to cross over A1A going to get to that crosswalk?
And as I say that at this point, we're in a conceptual stage. This is an idea that we're working. We haven't got down to all the nuts and bolts of everything.
But if you don't bring it up now, it happens like that.
Very good point.
If we can make it happen, if DOT will allow us to do it, that's the caveat. But if DOT will allow us to do it, we will design it so that it's both public and private access and both public and private use. The idea is to get everybody safely across A1A to the park.
Well, one of the things is, even if it's considered public access, but the entrance to that skyway is going to be on the hotel property, correct? As it ends on the west side. will there be like one of the newer commercial buildings that was just built in Satellite Beach? Will some of those parking spaces be designated for residents to use so that they can walk over?
To be honest with you, what we were thinking is there'd be pedestrians and bicycle access, et cetera, folks coming to the beach from Montecito or those other areas out there. We haven't talked about that as far as designating parking spaces, and the hotel does need their parking spaces. But again, all I'm assuring you tonight is if we build the pedestrian crossover, it will be for both public and
Again,
private.
conceptual plan, you've got time to think about it. I think it's important.
Understand, and we agree. We think it's important. We can create easements so that the public can get to and over the pedway through the hotel parcel. All those things that you're mentioning can be solved.
Sandra Sullivan, South Patrick Shores. Okay, I have a few things to ask you about. So the first is, in attending a lot of city council meetings, it was emphasized by the council members that in the objections to Oceana, a lot of people weren't happy about the height. That's an understatement. That this was a great thing because it wasn't a hotel, and so that people go to work, they don't use their toilets as much. So I find it, you can't really have it both ways and say that the units don't count when it's a hotel, when this city has said in the past that those units have a higher impact. That's my first point. My second point is pertaining to concurrency. It is already documented we have a concurrency issue with drinking water. We have already low water pressure. That is why the county, or Melbourne Water rather, is in the permitting stage of putting in new pipes across Pineda, which is in partnership also with Cocoa Water. So we have issues with water. Recently, there was testing. Melbourne Water opened the hydrants for 3 days, and even still we had coliform bacteria. We have documented coliform bacteria on a repeated basis. So obviously there's a lot of issues with water concurrency. We also have a concurrency issue with roads, because we already are at a level D LOS. In South Patrick Shores, for example, I got a zoning documents from the county for a property where I got notification that they were doing a zoning change, and that LOS was D between Ocean Boulevard and Berkeley. So if they're at D, then other areas are at D. Also, Pineda Causeway is at a level of service of D service. Now, if you read the comprehensive plan, it says this project cannot go forward unless the level of service on the incoming roads and on A1A are level C or better. So I suggest you get a copy or have a corridor study for Satellite Beach prior to this project. I also would like to address some of the things in the ordinance. So the ordinance specifically stated that it was to be no more, a maximum of 7 stories. We would like to keep it a maximum of 7 stories. And quite frankly, the public of Satellite Beach and the neighboring areas do not want these monstrosities of 85 feet, and that is a maximum of 7 stories, a maximum building height of 85 feet. The 7 stories would tend to keep that a little bit in check. The other thing that they modified is they made the buildings longer than 200 feet. Now, we're not just talking about the condo buildings, but we're talking about essentially they put in, what do you call it, row housing? And so they are at least they look to be about at least 500 feet on there. So this PUD 3.3 specifies a maximum building length of 200 feet. We would like to keep that. Further, we would like the units to reflect, all the units on the PUD 3, which was specified. And as well, on the conceptual plan, it does not maintain the area of green space that is specified in the document either. And that is specified somewhere in here, but also with the perimeter setback, it says that the structure for every foot over 25 feet will be 30 feet plus 1. If you look at the conceptual plan that they've done, it's very congested. There's very little green space on it. It certainly does not adhere to the perimeter setbacks. And it says a maximum lot coverage of 60%, and if you look at that image, it looks to be about 95% lot coverage. So if you go to the county's regulations on the west side of A1A are, you are allowed to build to 45 feet. At 35 feet, you're only allowed to have 40% of the lot occupied by the building. If you go higher, then there are more setbacks. And obviously, we're way off that on here. And then,
Please, you can continue, but try to wrap it up.
okay, and then the last thing I wanted to mention is in Ordinance 876, it says any PUD submitted for approval shall be consistent with all provisions of the city's comprehensive plan, this chapter, and all land development regulations of the city. This has not been built, and I don't understand. We have a charter that limits the height to 35 feet right now. So why does this exceed when it says in the ordinance that it has to conform to the comprehensive plan and to the land development regulations of the city? And the land development regulations of the city are 35 feet. Thank you very much.
Good evening, I'm Betsy Vincent. I live in Montecito and Satellite Beach. I have a question concerning what buffer is going to be provided between this brand-new complex and Montecito, specifically along Carlsbad Drive. During the construction phase, how are we going to be shielded or sheltered from the debris, the dirt, the dust that's going to be generated during this time? And the safety issues, keeping us safe in relationship to the workers and so forth that will be on this site. And in the future, what are the plans to separate Montecito from this, or is it all going to be flowing into one thing? Does anybody have an answer for me?
I believe it specifies on the conceptual plan.
I can't figure this out.
Yes, sorry, if you want to speak specifically about the wall. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Oh, and where are these emergency roads coming from the new property in Montecito? Where are they going to bring those through Montecito?
Well, what we showed on the plan is the northernmost connecting road. I don't remember the street name, but at the north end of Berkeley.
So you're going to have an access from this new thing onto Redondo for emergency vehicles.
What I believe I said is that if the CDD agreement, the folks running the CDD allow us to have that emergency access, then we will install it. The city is the city fire folks are the ones asking us to put it in because they want to have access that direction. The more access, the better from a fire perspective and an emergency perspective. So the city's asking us to do it. We're saying, yes, we'll do it as long as the CDD allows us to do it. The agreement is very clear. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to tell you what I think that agreement says, but if the CDD allows us to do it, then we'll provide an emergency entrance, a gated emergency entrance. If the gate would be closed except for fire trucks, ambulances, etc. That's what we're proposing.
And the separation between
the separation between our project and Montecito will be a wall. During construction, there will have to be at least an enclosed fence. Adam, please correct me if I'm wrong, but at least an enclosed fence to protect the construction area from kids, etc. Obviously, you don't want them in there. We don't want them in there. We understand. So during construction, there will be at least a fence, and when we're all done, there will be a wall.
May I ask where this wall will be constructed? Because I understand your property begins right where the sidewalk on Carlsbad, just east of it.
It'll be close to that. I can't tell you exactly, but it'll be close to that.
So it'll be a sidewalk and a wall.
Sidewalk, a couple of feet perhaps, and a wall, yes, ma'am.
Concrete wall?
I don't know if that's been decided yet, it's kind of a final design
And
issue.
how high will that wall be?
I am assuming 6 feet, I believe that's the city's.
That's the minimum dividing commercial and residential.
This isn't.
Right, I understand that,
It's
but
a
that's,
single family butting up to Montecito.
there's no separation.
All single family houses butting up to Montecito. The hotel is several hundred feet to the east of that. I believe we're, best I know at this point, we're on a 6-foot wall.
Just wait, we'll let you come up later, that too, I don't want to, yeah. Nobody's gonna read the firing point here, so. If you want to come up.
Are there going to be pedestrian entrances on that wall, or is it a solid wall? A solid wall.
Yeah.
A solid wall.
Other than the gated emergency thing on Redondo?
Yes.
Is that going to have a keypad that the emergency vehicles have access to, or is it?
It'll have an approved emergency access. There's several.
I live on Redondo, that's why I'm asking this question.
I understand there's several different versions that emergency folks allow. I'm not.
The fire department and the police department have a special key for the gate. There's a 100 key.
And that will be the only emergency, or are you planning on doing another one further south along Carlsbad?
That's the only one. That's at the city's request. You know, the city would do that.
How's it going? Dan Williman, Carriage Park. I got a couple of questions. So, you're familiar with the FUD site next door to this, the PCN3, just to the north? I've taken reports of buried material well outside of the defined FUD site to the west. I'm just kind of concerned, maybe the engineering firm would be best to answer this question. What's a contingency plan? Should, like a plane fuselage be dug up during the sewer replacement or stormwater installation? Has there been ground penetrating radar done? Has there been any type of underground look? And if not, what's the contingency plan should you find something like that?
The development site has always been residential. There's never been any planes flying in there. It's always been a residential use.
Right.
So we don't have a contingency, I don't think they have a contingency plan. We don't, as a city, don't have a contingency plan if we find a fuselage.
Okay. My question is about whether planes have flown over and crashed. This lady here dug up a plane cockpit control panel in her yard, and she's just to the north of this. And as I stated, I've gotten reports of other people who have found things like buried jeeps, missiles, airplane wings, stuff like that to the west of this FUD site. Now, the FUD site is directly bordering to the north of the PCN3, and that's my concern. Not only is the possibility of this stuff being dug up there, but I believe on the EPA EPIC study, she may know better than I, but there's documented drainage trenches that run right through this. I would also like to encourage toxicology testing to be done directly over those historic drainage sites just to make sure there's no contamination there. But my main concern would be the contingency for if some sort of material is dug up. What's the plan for that?
That plan is not there at this point because they foresee nothing. The environmental report here, anyone's welcome to look at it.
Can I comment on that, please, Janet?
Let's get everybody a chance to talk first, and we can come back to it.
Pete Laveau, Redondo Drive, Montecito. Just wondering, there was one section that wasn't referred to in the clarification in 9034. There was a deletion that in regard to commercial usage, that such usage shall be subordinate to the predominantly residential character of the PUD and shall be designated primarily serve the needs of the residents of the planned development in which they're located. Just wondering the background on why that's being requested be stricken.
Because in the comprehensive plan, they classify the same language as a use or something that the community of Satellite Beach as a whole can use.
I understand the comprehensive plan does indicate that, but the PUD was scoped to restrict such usage in light of the comprehensive plan. Just wondering why staff is recommending the elimination of that clause.
Okay, that's another agenda item, that's fine. But that's because they feel that it's for the good of the community. Why? It seems like they commented that.
David, can I ask another question? I know you're only supposed to do it one time.
Well, let me just ask, is there anybody else that hasn't spoken yet that would like to speak? I'm willing to go another round, because that's fine. So yeah, coming back up, Dale, and then we'll get to you, Ms. Sullivan.
Dale Abrams, CRA resident. Retention. Let's talk about retention. Where is it on the map? Is it up there, retention ponds? Because I was looking at Montecito today, PCN1, PCN2, and I didn't realize there's like 6 ponds up there. Did you know that? They got 6 ponds. I thought initially there was going to be a pond, retention pond, on this project, and I don't see it. So what are they doing? Are they doing something underground? Are they doing bladders? Are they going to go over to the 6 ponds over on PC1 and PC2? Is it going to go over to the pond that's got the fence around it on Shearwater? I don't know.
Yes, we can have the answer.
Yeah, could you answer that as far as retention is concerned? Because we are concerned about stormwater runoff. That's a big deal.
And the storm, yeah.
I'd be happy to. The master stormwater permit for the Montecito project, the full north side of Shearwater, includes in it this parcel, as does the CDD agreement. So there's already an agreement in place and drainage pipes stubbed into the property from Montecito that we are able to tie into. And we may have a minor modification of that permit to tweak it around, but there's a master stormwater permit already in place with St. John's to address the drainage. We do have a little bit that we have to provide per the master permit along the east property line right next to A1A. That'll be dry. It won't be a pond. It'll be dry retention. But the answer is that the stormwater is taken care of already and master planned, master permitted, and we'll follow that.
And it is underground, is that correct, for what you're proposing, the
No, sir.
stormwater management?
The conveyance.
No,
The
sir.
conveyance underground.
The conveyance is
Yeah,
pipes
that's
underground.
on
Yes,
that, yeah.
yes, sir, pipes underground. The retention we have is right there along the green strip along along on A1A there.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I've been
Right,
very,
state your name
yeah,
again.
Sandra Sullivan, South Patrick Shores. I've been very involved in the whole floods process, so I'm pretty much consider myself ground zero in what's been dug up. I've done an extraordinary amount of research. So there's 2 issues. There's 3 issues. So there are the indications the area was used as munitions range. And then there's, because when you look at the bombs that are found, they're not on the PUD area. There's bombs found to the west. There's been bombs found to the south. The second issue, the one that concerns me the most, is that of the drainage channels. So there was a drainage channel that came off of Patrick Air Force Base from a chemical disposal area down to the disposal area with the most harm, and that comes down to Satellite High School. And our disposal site is very similar to that disposal site that's just above Pineda Causeway. It's historical from the Banana River Naval Air Station days. But our disposal site in our area also was used by the Long Range Proving Grounds, which I'm told by a retired naval munitions expert, that potentially it was used for bulk disposal of their chemical weapons experimentations, hence the high arsenic in the area. So our disposal site, originally in 1943, if you look at the image, it looks like a scorpion. At the bottom of the scorpion, there's also a drainage channel on that. These are documented on the EPA EPIC study, which is on my group, Waves Beachside. And you can look up that report, it's there. And that goes all the way down to Indian Harbor Beach. And what is a concern for me right now is that in my yard, I have a sweet smell. The EPA came in and tested my yard. My yard is over the health limit on arsenic, DDT, PCBs, but more concerning than that, it has chloroform, bromodichloromethylene, and dioxane. These, the two things, and plus the dioxane, are what they call tracers that you look for when you're doing forensics, when you're looking for TCE. TCE is the airplane cleaner that they use to clean the aircraft, and would have been disposed with the oil barrels that was mixed with it, and we had oil barrels buried. That gets into that's a very difficult contamination to clean up. It gets into it sinks, has a specific gravity greater than 1, it goes down to the bottom of the water table. And you end up with pockets of TCE. Now, you might just go, nah, that's not there. I have a sweet smell consistent with TCE in my yard. It makes me sick, makes my lymph nodes swell up, and I have now a lump in my right breast. But also, the county came in and tested that drainage channel, the one that comes off of the base, and they found TCE. So what do you think the chances are there's going to be TCE in the other ones? So part of what we want the FUDs to do when they come in is do testing. So I would encourage you, before you go ahead and move ahead with the development of this property, that they move and do some testing and do some what's called push technology. It's where they take a core sample and they test every foot, and they go down into the water table and to the bottom of the water table. They'll test for, sometimes TCE can float when it's mixed with petroleum, but it has a specific gravity. Sometimes it sinks if it's not mixed with petroleum. So you have to test both the surface and below, like both. I also want to just make something that nobody mentioned, and that is on the original report for these properties, they were endangered species. And I don't know what the status is of them, but there's no green space to even allow for any wildlife in there. So, in terms of the retention areas, they could incorporate open ponds and retention area and provide an area for wildlife, and I would encourage them to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, one moment. Let me just answer a question about there's a couple different things in there I wanted to unpack. One of which was the endangered species. I know because it had previously been in development that there's no remediation, I presume, required.
It said there were no endangered species.
So.
What endangered species were?
I don't have the report with me to say it offhand, but when he talks about 1,000 units, he's talking about that whole property. And he throws it around, and I just want to be clear that when you're talking about the PUD, the north side, he's talking about the 1,000 being across all of the units. And so be careful when he throws the numbers around, that you're watching that he's talking about all of the entire thing, including the larger piece on the south, which has not been developed yet. And we get a number, and comparing apples to apples, which is the north side of the PUD3, when you're throwing those numbers around, just so it's not misleading.
Dan Wellman, Carriage Park. I just wanted to clarify, it's direct push sampling.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board on what we've heard so far? Any additional comments?
Let's see, I had a few notes. Mr. Mayor has addressed the retention for us, so that's understood that it's under the complete master plan for our water. Regarding I know we don't know what what DOT is going to approve yet, but I noticed that per the traffic study report, that there's certain recommendations that aren't reflected in the plan, specifically at that north A1A entrance, as well as where they list a decel distance of either 240 or 290, depending on which entrance. That's not recommended for any of the existing decel lanes or areas there. I would think that would need to be considered as well. If they're recommending a 290-foot decel northbound on A1A for that entrance, it should probably be similar on the Shearwater decel. There's discussion in the traffic report regarding recommended improvements to South Patrick Drive, right, in a certain area, as well as its access to Pineda. The access to Pineda one would look pretty easy to solve. It was just through signaling or phasing of signals, right? The expansion of that, the widening of that road is, maybe a little concerning whether or not that would happen. I think DOT currently has no immediate plans to make any of the recommended improvements, including additional turning lanes at Pineda and A1A. So I'm curious what the developer's approach to that was going to be.
My name's George Galan. I'm with LTG, located at 1970 Dairy Road, West Melbourne. The improvements that were identified as part of the study are prop share eligible. So the project would have to pay their prop share portion for those improvements. As part of the report, we have to show what failures are on the roadway and how to mitigate them. And that's what we've done in the report. Granted, this is just the planning stage. We've pretty much done a site plan TIA for what is shown now. The site plan may change, I don't know. DOT is currently reviewing the study. We haven't gotten any comments back yet from them regarding the driveways along A1A. The reason that you see the differences in lane lengths is because the northbound lane on Shearwater, the northbound left, we have to include a Q length in the analysis because of the signal. The actual turn lane length for deceleration that's required would be less, and that's what's shown in the southbound right turn lanes into the driveways, and that's why you have that difference.
Yeah, I was talking specifically, or at least what's on the plans, whether or not that's going to change or not, but the northbound left turn lane onto Shearwater from A1A appears to be exactly as it is today, which I think is about 125 feet versus the 200 and something.
Like I said, this is still conceptual. When you go to final site plan, that's when all those will be shown on the plans.
Understood. To someone else's point earlier, we'd like to see if there are improvements in an area. We'd like to see at least that those improvements are addressed. Whether or not it's the final answer or not, we don't know that obviously until we get through all the engineering that's required. We wouldn't want to miss any scope early on. Say, oh, we approved it, now we don't have to do it.
Well, like I said, you still have to improve site plan, and that would be part of the site plan. Okay.
Regarding the, again, we have two different matters to contend with. The first is to recommend to approve the conceptual development plan, and the second is to approve amending the language to basically come to agreement with that conceptual plan if we choose to proceed. So starting with just the conceptual plan, let's limit it to that and say, what are we prepared to do as a board? Do we want to recommend this? Do we have additional questions that we want to get through? Anything else?
There were some issues that were brought up that I think are very pertinent to the One being the direct push technology, and it bothers me that nothing has been, it hasn't been given thought that should be looked into, especially what's been going on at Satellite Beach and what's been found throughout Satellite Beach. I think that should be part of the development structure that should be done. Something should be done before they go ahead and develop.
So then they do have the phase 1 plan that they did, and then they did a limited phase 2 testing based on the cities. That's, in the state, that the city had requested additional testing. Now, whether, to the degree of what the specific form of the testing is, as far as the plan goes, I have to defer to the people that know that more so that it isn't something that I don't think we can build into a plan. Now, if we fundamentally decide we don't want to approve this plan because we think, based on, whatever anecdotal evidence we have or other people's evidence, that's fine. We have that ability to do that. But I would say we should probably be limiting our discussion on it to the plan on its design, on its merits, and then defer to city staff and the environmentalists to make sure that that's responsible.
I was just saying maybe we should make some recommendations as a plan, as a group.
That do additional testing?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, is the city or the owner of the property at this point required to pass any kind of requirements for soil and water testing before they are able to approve a plan, or we go to approve the plan? Or are we just going on what has been done in the past?
They were required to do a phase 1.
Okay.
Requested they do a phase 2, partial phase 2. They've done that, that's this book here. Okay. And they've come back with their findings, and that's where we're at.
When you say their findings,
With the universal testing company.
Independent testing company.
Yeah, independent testing company, and they do not have issues with the property. So contamination.
And again, it is, we're at a conceptual plan stage here, so any additional testing that they would need to do for soil testing, for their structural, for anything else that they have to do, that's all subsequent to us approving a concept. Again, it is just a concept. They're going to have to meet all the requirements for, again, the stormwater and all those things that they think are in place. They think this plan is going to comply with them, but they're going to have to demonstrate that as they proceed with the plan. We're simply here to contend with the concept of it and either make objections or make a recommendation if we so desire.
Can I ask you a question?
You can.
So,
Please come up.
When I spoke to Courtney Barker about a year ago and asked her, she said, the PUD 3, we're kind of stuck with it, we can't change it, et cetera, et cetera. And what I see is a lot of, it was a little, 2017 when I spoke to her. What I see is a lot of changes. We changed to commercial mixed use, and like this meeting here, nobody knew about it. Like, we've told the county we were really highly interested in knowing when this meeting was, and please let us know when this meeting was planned. Nobody said a word to us. This happened that one person here happened to be on the city site and checked and went, at the meetings this week, and so we found out last night. And the city knew we wanted to know. And it's just like that mixed use meeting. It went through. A lot of people don't know about these meetings. A lot of people don't know because they're, you have the City of Satellite Beach city manager's Facebook page, and they don't say about the changes. And so when the mixed use, when we found out after the fact, and we asked about it, it was like, oh yeah, we're going to have some retail space, we're going to make this, because, you think about it, one day, Pita Causeway is going all the way out to Orlando. That's the plan as far as what I understand from intermodal. And we're going to have, people coming over here for the day, and they're going to want to go to shops and stuff, beach shops and stuff. So we were thinking, okay, you have retail on the bottom, and you have your residential and the condos above. Great, and what that gentleman was saying, the document, its intent was saying, is that this is going to serve the people who are living there, you know, where you have coffee shops and stuff like that. But having a hotel is, especially, you know, another condo, 85 feet, you know, is not what people wanted. But even what that concept plan is, when you read the PUD 3, it doesn't conform to what the PUD 3 specifies in terms of the area that a maximum lot coverage, 60%. Look at it. What percentage is covered? It doesn't meet the criteria of the PUD 3.
I mean, if you're challenging the calculations on there, there's, I mean, it says, it's on there, coverage.
Madam Patcherby, I'd just like to point out that we're proposing to build less density than we're approved to build. It would actually be easier to finance, and it would be more profitable to build the density that we're allowed to build there with the mid-rises. But we chose this plan because we thought it was better, even though less profitable in general. So I just think it's important that, you know, we point that out.
So I said lot coverage, and he said density, but his density when we read the hotel units is more than what was allowed by the PUD.
I understand.
So again, any plan that they submit and that has to be approved will have to meet all the requirements of the land use regulations. That's just because the concept might not show it from the pictures. Again, this is a concept, and it's designed to stir this conversation. It's designed to give us an opportunity to state the things that we have as far as what we'd like to see happen, but they still have to meet all the requirements. This isn't the thing that they're going to be able to go break ground on next week. So all those rules that are part of the land use regulations are all still applicable. We're not suspending those, and we're not offering any sort of holiday on those.
Carl, do you want to go through how it meets those, or
How it does it.
if necessary? Well, because one question I do have is the building length of 200 feet, does that apply? I know that applies in certain areas.
That applies.
What's that?
That applies now, as it sits right now.
Okay, because these are 224, so that's a.
The single family are even longer, they're like 500.
Those are lots, they're not houses. That's not a building, it's a building lot, so. And then I assume the same residential coverage applies to those lots of 60% and 75, are those 75 impervious as well? Right, because this site is, it's allowed 75% impervious and 60% lot coverage, right? So it's below 60% lot coverage. And I assume similar or whatever the residential numbers are apply to the.
Right, the residential use is plopped down from PCM 1. Okay, that's the one guy. The developer, as I stated before, he wants to develop his property, and he has the right to develop that as the owner, he got those rights. But he is also allowed to ask for changes in the code to accommodate those necessities. And that's what the second part of how we change in the code, amending the code, but staying within the guidelines of the PUD. Okay, that's where our next section, I think that's where you're thinking of going. You want to go into the code changes, and then table this, and go through the code changes.
I would like to see us come to some agreement on the concept, because if we just determine that the concept plan is not going to move forward, then as far as I'm concerned, the code changes are going to be moved. So I'd be willing to entertain a motion to recommend it, or entertain a motion to deny such a recommendation. It could be one of two ways. We can either have a motion to approve the conceptual development plan as currently drawn, or we can recommend it with changes, or we can recommend to move on to the next agenda item and not make a recommendation to the board. Those are our three options.
Yeah.
So we need to do one.
Well, I think for one, in terms of any changes, right, where it's not in compliance, like let's say if it's 200 feet is the limit, that's.
Right, as the PCM 3 is now worded.
Right. So is, that would require a variance.
No, it would require a variance if he went that way. The easier way to do it is to change the code to eliminate that requirement, because they could come in, the Board of Adjustments could actually come in and grant them a variance to go to 224, whatever it is. So those are one of their authorities that they have, and, you know, instead of going through these things that we have a lot in our code, where we restrict something because it's on a corner lot or whatever, and then people come in and they have to get a variance on it, and 99% of the time the variance is granted because they don't make sense. So it's just a cleaner way to go about this is to amend the code.
So what about the 50-foot distance between the condo buildings? Is that?
What does it say in the code?
And I don't know what that side is. It's probably just a side lot, right? It's not listed on the drawings what that separation needs to be.
Breezeway?
I guess that is a breezeway in this case, yeah.
I'm not seeing that they address that in the code.
Also the 7 stories.
I don't see that in the code, so, figure out what
So
else.
we've got silent to it.
Do we know what it is for example, on A1A, Oceana, for example, I know that they had some variations.
That's more than 50 feet separation, for sure.
That's,
I don't know what it is.
I don't know what it is either, but it's not clear from more than 50.
that would be my hunch. I don't remember
Yeah,
what
just
that
see,
code
that area of the project seems really tight, right? There's no view corridor, limited view corridors, especially, more limited if you put habit trails in between the buildings. So. In terms of making recommendations, I mean, if people have concerns and want changes, I think that might be the way to go.
But again, we can approve the concept and then choose to make those, and subsequent changes in the code to not make those. So what we have in front of us too, if that wasn't clear, is that we have the proposed changes that would be required to meet this concept the way it's currently drawn.
Mhm.
So we still have that ability to make that recommendation, say like, these are the things, again, the concept of it, which is to say, a plot of single-family residences, a hotel, 3 condo towers. That I would encourage you to say, like, that's the concept. To me, that's what we're talking about. And if we agree with that concept, then we can move past the first item, make that recommendation of the concept, we like it, and then suggest that we have these tweaks that we'd like to see, whatever, a little more space between the buildings, restriction on anything else, really, that we have the code language to go through too. So, make sure that those, still viewing those as 2 separate tasks here that are both within our purview and our expectations.
Excuse me, but the concept, when she said you're too tall, and if you approve the concept, your buildings are too tall, correct?
No, the code right now allows for 85 feet maximum building height. That's not changing. That's not a proposed change either.
But what he proposes to take out the 7 stories, which is part of the PUD 3. And the thing is, it's like you're talking about putting the cart before the horse. Let's get the nuts and bolts worked out of the PUD 3, the rules here that are here, let's follow the rules. If you want to approve the concept, we'll change the rules first, before you approve the concept. Because we're not following the rules.
Again, the concept, for everybody's clarity particular, is it's 3 condo buildings, a hotel, and the plot of a single-family residence.
But you had
That's the
people
concept.
speak out
That's the
about
concept.
the hotel too, that they wanted the
commercial side to be, to serve the people that are living there.
I understand that. We have a concept in front of us, so please, let us have a discussion. I understand that. The concept is exactly what is written down. It's a hotel, it's 3 condo buildings, and single-family residence lot. That's the concept. They've given it the way they would like to lay it out, the dimensions that they have present. But again, anything that is approved needs to meet the existing code. The code as it written is very plain. We have it in front of us. Staff has made recommendations to change those codes to bring it into compliance with their plan, but we are in no way compelled to make that recommendation to City Council. Again, we're not compelled to make a recommendation to accept this plan either, or to, again, not to accept it, just to recommend that they accept it. So there are 2 different things there. We are not redefining the plan, we're taking the plan as it is right now and saying whether or not we conceptually agree with it or recommend it. So, I'm not sure if anybody has a motion to offer. If not, then I'm afraid we might have to move on. And then let me ask this. It's a lot to take in. I understand that too. I'm not sure what is the question about whether or not we have additional time to review this. If we, in the absence of specific questions, I guess I would try to avoid that scenario so that we're not in the same position we are. But if we have specific information we'd like to get from staff, I'd like to know what the time frame is or what the requirements for council.
Yes.
To mimic what Gail Abrams said, growth is great, and you want to see this place being developed. And hearing what the other side is saying, it could be more than what it is. They have the opportunity or the whereabouts to make it bigger and have more people. So we have to balance that. And, Gail was saying we're talking about sewerage and we're talking about water. As a resident of Satellite Beach myself, I'm concerned about the travel impact study as well. So don't think that, we don't look at that. We do. This is why I asked Carl, what was there before this was developed? And he said there was over 1,000 residents there. And the town of Satellite Beach was able to sustain that.
How many are on the north side of Pelican now? And then how many would be
I'm sorry. This is really, really need to limit the conversation here between the board and staff.
So, in the, what was I saying? I lost my train of thought.
Basically, that we were able to sustain, the services were able to sustain the people we had out there before.
Right.
Those houses would just come up. And they are able to sustain the Montecito project, the townhomes, and the single family as well.
So, given that information, I make a motion to accept the conceptual drawings as they are. With the stipulation that they follow all the codes and, and we make recommendations as we go along to favor the residents of Satellite Beach.
So what we would need would be, like we were just saying, anything that is submitted to the city has to meet the codes. Like it's not a negotiable discussion, and it's certainly not one we're going to be a part of. They can go through variances and anything like that it varies. But what we are really limited here to is recommending that we approve this plan, or that the city council approve this plan. it's actually a pretty simple, request that's being made of us. And as long as we feel like we want this, so if we want to make a motion that we approve this, with the full knowledge that yes, of course, anything that is approved by the city has to have already met all existing codes, all existing regulations, everything that we've been talking about. And we're not the only jurisdiction, the authority in this situation too. I mean, they do have the St. John River Water Management District, they have to get in with, they do have the DOT, they have to be in compliance.
I guess the question here is does this plan look like it would work at Satellite Beach?
Mm-hmm.
How they get there, that's another story. We start here, we're at this conceptual plan. We think this will work in the city, and it's a good fit for the city. And then we get there somehow, some other way.
I simply offered additional history about it too. It was in 2015 when we had, at the Comprehensive Planning and Advisory Board, that I was previously a member of before this board joined together, and Ellen was on it as well. We had that discussion back when the entirety of the PUD, there was very little discussion about developing any portion of it. And if you recall, going back 12 years, I think, or whatever it was, that they first started tearing that down, and the idea was they were going to rebuild it all entirely with all residents, essentially rehabbing the whole thing and increasing or just making it newer, as well as homes that needed to go. That was what they were planning on doing at the time, and then that all got seized when the market went down for obvious reasons. And we indicated that the hotel and motel, or hotel and conference center, I believe is what we called it, would be something that we would indicate that the city would be willing to support, because we had lost our hotel in the 2004 hurricanes as far as the Ramada that was right across from Publix, and the city didn't have another one within its limits. So that was all that happened there, is we indicated that a plan like this would be something that we would support, or that we wanted to entertain, and we didn't have an ability to entertain that before with the PUD as it currently was written. So that was why that happened then. Again, we're not beholden to that and say like that means the first real plan that we've gotten that we have to approve. Just saying it is consistent with many years now of indications from this board and from city staff saying that if we could open that up and be open to it, that we might end up finding a developer who would like to collaborate on that. So it's just a little bit more history to it, as someone who's on those boards too.
Great.
Can I ask a question?
Yes. Please
Mr.
make it
Carl
quick.
here today told me in the office that to approve this conceptual plan would require change to the PUD language, to reduce it, to take out the language for the 7 stories, and to take out the language for the 200 feet. So are you thinking about doing that against the communication here tonight that people were not for that?
Again, we are not dealing with the code right now. I'm only dealing with the conceptual
So
plan.
you're not changing the PUD reading?
Please. We're trying to get past the first stage before we can pass the second. I understand, please. We're not having a back and forth discussion here. I'm sorry, I don't think we heard from you tonight. If you would like to say something, I'm willing to entertain that.
Larry Bradshaw, 131 Under Drive, and I'm the chairman of Montecito. I've heard a lot of negativity about this project, and I would like to at least have some positive. A lot of the neighbors I've spoken to were all very interested in this project, and we look forward to this project, especially with the hotel, not having a place for when family or friends come to stay, visit, as well as we're hoping the hotel will have a nice restaurant or other places for residents around here to join. And we look forward to the crossway over the A1A. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think what confuses me is just the wording. I mean, I would approve, I mean, just that we can approve this, but it's contingent that it follows, the code changes in place. Like, it's just, it's odd to approve something that, it's 220 feet, not 200 feet. So, that we are not letting them off the hook for any of those others. So I don't know if we can just change the wording of it?
Well, again, that's our next step. We can. So.
Well.
No, just changing the wording of the conceptual plan.
Right, change the wording of the conceptual plan to recommend approval pending, that it meets all the code requirements, zoning requirements. Now, should we elect to modify those at all, that could be a separate topic. I think everyone might need a little time to digest all of that. You know what I mean? Versus, you know, a full.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no reason we
Yeah, so
can't.
think with the wording, I'm just not getting the words out clear, but if we can make that contingent, that it, you know, that it follows, then I would, I mean, I don't know what the wording is, but I would make a motion to.
Is it at a given, if we're going to approve this conceptual plan, we can approve it all we want if there are, the second step, the codes that we do not want to recommend going forward changes, then whatever falls into the conceptual plan that we approve can go no farther than this tonight. If those.
Well, I mean, they can always revise. I mean,
Yeah,
to
exactly.
bring it
That's
into
what I'm saying.
compliance.
It has to be revised.
So that's why I'm saying, like, that's why if simply recommend approving this conceptual plan as it's written, and we do not change the code at all, then it's, yeah, some of these specifics, they have 50 feet between here, or, actually, that wasn't one that we determined it wasn't. because it's commercial.
The length of the building.
But like the length of the building is an obvious one. It's written as 220, 224, and we don't change the code to allow them to go higher than 200. They have to rewrite that plan. If they want to move forward with their plan, they have to rewrite this when they submit their final plan for review. And again, there's going to be negotiation with the city too, as far as making sure it's all the codes, and that just because staff has made the, I'm sure there's been a lot of thought into it, I trust you implicitly, however, if they missed one thing that is in the code that we are not recommending that they change because it doesn't meet this, just didn't catch it, then they're still going to have to go through that discussion. And we might end up in this similar position when they refine the plan further down the line, where they say, what we really want is a little bit more of a code change, whether it could be less, or whether they want 8 stories or whatever it is. They can then, you know, petition for us, and we can review it at that point too. Again, but the concept of it, just being the hotel, 3 condo buildings, and a single family, plot of single family lots, that's the concept. That's all it, let go of the dimensions, let go of even, you know, what they're called, you know, because it's really just a concept. Because they're gonna have to put a lot of time and no doubt resources and money into this to make sure that they have a plan that they can actually build off.
Can I just say one last thing?
I really think we need to move on. Pardon me. We really need to move on this. Okay? We really need to move on.
I make a motion to recommend the conceptual plan.
I second the motion.
Thank you.
Sorry, one night.
Okay.
Peters?
Aye.
Allen?
Aye.
And David?
Aye.
I forget somebody.
No, I made the motion. Okay, great. Now we can go on to the so now the next order of business is to again recommend approving or amending chapter 30, section 3903, the PUD residential planned unit development, and section 3914, the PCN 3 Pelican Coast North. We have a memo here that Carl had prepared. We've been obviously referencing it throughout most of the evening. These are the changes that staff has identified would need to be put in place, or they feel would need to be put in place to meet the conceptual plan as it's currently written. That's an accurate statement, correct? Correct. So, our task now is to make recommendations to the City Council about what changes we think are applicable to the code, if any. Again, it's not a requirement that we change anything that's written here. These are the recommendations that staff made to come into compliance with the conceptual plan. There's been a couple that have come up frequently this evening. Do we want to go through it page by page? Do we think that'd be valuable, or have you all had a chance to review this enough to pick up the things you'd like to discuss? It's not that long, so I think going through it is a reasonable task.
Okay.
Go through it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So just going right to, what is the third page in my set of memos, which is the 3914 PCN 3 Pelican Coast North. The intent is added in the language about single-family residential according, that's obviously to meet the component of it that's not condominiums, that's not hotel. Anybody have any objection to that? I think single-family residence is certainly consistent with what is in place there, and it should have been reflected to begin with, if you ask me, but.
Agree. Agreed.
And the commercial uses, again, that would be the hotel, adding that as a possibility, and we'll come to the specifics of what that is later. But does anybody have any comments about that? Okay. The other is the maximum building height of 85 feet and with a maximum of 7 stories. Carl, do you want to just revisit that, why the removal of the 7 stories?
You have 85 feet. It doesn't really matter how many stories you have. In all our residential districts, we've taken the restriction of the number of stories out. You can have 35 foot for most buildings, plus the A1A. We've just taken that out because it really is, how much is not an issue. So the number of stories of zero development, the height is what we're talking about.
It makes sense to me. Anybody else? From a community impact, it's certainly the size of the building is a significant thing to me. But.
Right. Same, can we get a little clarification where it states that there is parking on the first 2 levels of the condo buildings? Is that correct? Did I read that correctly? Are those full floor plates of parking?
2 floors of parking.
Yeah, I mean, there's a full floor plate of the building? Okay. So essentially that gives you 7 stories of residence and 2 stories of parking. No, 8 stories of residence, right? Because we're.
7 stories of residence.
Yeah, you
Well, no, there's a reference in there to some subgrade parking, which, good luck with that, but.
Okay, so no objection to keeping that as written. Or as recommended, I'm sorry. The maximum building length of 200 feet, striking that. Is there a reason we opted to strike that as opposed to revising it? Thinking about
it could be revised.
Thinking about future, implications of
exactly.
of just removing it entirely.
Yeah, I don't like removing it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And I'm,
put a new limit.
Yeah.
yeah, I'm real curious. I mean, on the east side of A1A, I mean, are there building length versus breezeway? Isn't there a percentage?
Yeah, there's a breezeway over
But
there.
isn't there a percentage of the length for the width of the breeze?
Based on the width of your buildings, the height of your buildings, separation between your buildings, you have to meet, I think it's a minimum of 40% breezeway on most RM3, and the more height you get, the more breezeway you have to have.
Right, and I think we should look at that kind of calculation for this.
Right.
Yeah, they came across the other way, and we're now off A1A. Breezeway is only rest on the east side of A1A.
I know, but this is gonna be the only 85-foot tall building on the west side of it.
So the question will be then, and really that'll actually come up in the commercial. So we have the single family residence, and then we can make the recommendation that the breezeway requirements on the west side, for lack of a better expression, echo the breezeway requirements on the east side. We can make that recommendation without necessarily having the specific calculations in front of us.
We can, but we don't, without the calculations, we don't know how that affects the.
That's what I'm saying. I'm thinking about a way to try to introduce it with more of a.
Can we get those calculations in a reasonable amount of time, or do we need to wait till next month?
We can do it in a reasonable amount of time, like we need right now.
I think that's what she suggested.
Yeah.
So you're
I mean,
breezeway?
Breezeway versus, I mean, what's required east side of A1A for condos? if it's a calculation percentage of length equals the breezeway.
Thank you, Carl. In the meantime, do we want to look at the maximum building length? I know for the plan, we're at 224, right? So if we want to reinstate a length, which I would, as opposed to simply striking it.
Let's see what the breezeway, what's required on the east side of A1A, because I think that would just be easier. If that works, and we just, because these will be the only buildings this tall on the west side of A1A.
The concern is right there. They're tall. Imagine they're as blocky as Oceana.
And they could be.
Right?
Yeah.
And likely are. I'm guessing the unit mix on these, the numbers you were seeing are a result of the unit mix to make as much money as
But
possible.
how far apart is Oceana?
Right.
More than 50 feet.
It's more than 50 feet. I don't know what it is, but it's more than 50 feet.
So while Carl is looking for that, can we move to the next page? It's the single-family residence, which are going to be, again, like he mentioned in his presentation, those just mirror the ones from PCN 1. As far as I'm concerned, I have no objection to those and accepting them, but
There are no, and we're talking no changes for residential.
for the single-family residence. Yeah.
In the single family criteria.
Yeah, what worked over there is gonna work, a couple hundred yards to the east. Okay, glad to hear that.
And then one of the things, so last meeting, we instituted the 110% parking, maximum parking of 110%. The plan is over by several parking counts.
Okay.
Spots. We can make sure that it's reflect that it also is.
Yeah.
We missed the minimum off-street parking.
On site.
Which one?
5. Changing it from 2.5 to 2.
Oh, good eye. I didn't even see that. So, yeah, number 5, so F5, it was 2.5 per unit, and it's being struck to 2 per unit.
That's only residential unit?
For multifamily residents.
Multifamily, yeah.
So that's going to be changed to 2.5?
It's being changed from 2.5 to 2.
To 2.
That's
Okay.
what the-
So the 110% parking is only for the commercial?
It's for the commercial, yeah. That's what we got,
Okay.
yeah. So we're good with that, the 2 per unit as opposed to 2.5, or
Is down to 2, yes.
the minimum, that's for the off-street parking, of course. And then the conditional uses, it was striking in paragraph 3, striking all conditional uses are subject to the requirements of the city governing the grant of conditional uses presently contained in Division 6, Article 2 of the city code, as well as the performance standard listed in Section 3228, subsection C.
I think that was housekeeping because there
Yeah.
wasn't that section anymore.
That's an ugly sentence, so I'm
Yeah,
for it being gone.
I was going to say, someone want to
Plus being an ugly sentence.
enlighten us on the
Yeah, I have no objection to that being.
intent of that? Okay.
Then 4A was actually changing the planning and advisory board from what it was before. It was the planning and zoning advisory board.
Thank you.
And, well, the section above that, though, too, so it says, striking the line, such uses shall be subordinate to the predominantly residential character of the PUD, and shall be designated to primarily serve the needs of the residents of the planned development in which they are located. And this is obviously to be consistent with the indication of accepting a hotel and conference center. We feel that, Jim, let me pick your brain on that. We feel that that needs to be struck because there'd be a conflict with a hotel or conference center, or is it more, because I don't see it as necessarily being in conflict, but, because I still like the statement and the character of it's predominantly a residential character, the PUD, but having a hotel on the far end near the main entrance, I don't think dramatically changes the profile of the entire PUD.
No, and you still keep the conditions that are A, B, C, D,
Right.
where they're actually making sure you're in the completely enclosed building and.
Well, you know, one of the concern, always our concern when removing such language is that what does that mean?
Next time, yeah.
Next time when,
That's what I mean. I'd be inclined to leave that in because I fundamentally don't believe it's in conflict with having a hotel and conference center.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, it is supportive of that regardless, so if you leave the language in, I think you're.
Yeah, I think we're all right. Okay, and then, yeah, the planning advisory board, thank you. We can move on to, okay, it's just a code reference on the next page.
That's being put back, Dave, 4A.
I'm sorry, say it again?
4A.
That's being put back to serve the needs of the residents of the
Yes,
plan.
yes. And then, no, that's good. Better to get it taken care of.
Okay. Density, what we want to know about.
Breezeway specifically in, so not at all density.
Breezeway and building length.
Breezeway.
Breezeway for commercial,
Oh,
or for, I'm sorry, multifamily residential.
this is a RM3 based where it's addressed, okay? Maximum density, go with that, breezeway. 0 to 38 feet high, you have to have 40% breezeway. 38 to 47, 40%. 47 to 56, 50%. And over 56, 60%.
Now, is that measured for the, it's the entire property, it's strictly between buildings?
And that's for the entire property, their line.
The side.
Yeah, I think there's my plan. I just wanted to see how far off. God, I hate when people don't put dimensions on the plans. Yeah, these then. Hold on. So we have 3 buildings of 224, 1 building of, let's call it 350. Do you know I don't see it on here, the entire northwest of the entire property, what the dimension is?
the graphic scale.
The north to south end.
I'm guesstimating it at about 80.
Eight, look up. There's 750 in buildings and another, there's 350.
It's about 1,200, you know where it's gonna be? It's gonna be in this one. There's a survey on here.
Building. Right? Give or take. So it's 1380 the entire property. Yeah.
Oh, just for that?
I don't understand.
Well, so that would be another thing, is do we apply it to that, or the whole thing?
But it's RM3 that we're gonna base it on.
You're right,
I think
it
it's
is,
this.
it's just that portion of it. So it's definitely different. By a lot.
Oh, yeah.
We'd be talking. So 210 over 880, so like 25% maybe.
You're talking the buildings at like 118 wide. I mean,
Building's 120.
I mean, why not? What's the argument that it wouldn't have to comply?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, it's not on the ocean, but it's across the street from it.
We're talking the 50-foot breezeway between the condos?
Yeah. 70 foot on the north and call it 50 for each of the rest of the pieces. So, Carl, give me your interpretation of that then. If this same set of buildings was on A1A and subject to those breezeway requirements, how far off would it be?
What is our total distance?
'Cause it looks to me,
We were,
got about 80
Carl,
total
we were looking
distance.
at the distance only for the condo, from the
For the
north
iron-
lot line to
iron free portion.
to the
or the,
gated entry drive by the hotel.
Yeah, you can count that.
yeah, you're right.
We're making you work. I mean, the buildings are
Looks
half.
like, compared to 70, we're looking at?
I'm sorry, say it again.
From the north condo to the line 70 feet, and then you got that gated entry, is that what you're talking about?
That's one of them, yeah, that, and then the spaces in between the buildings and the space to the south
Right.
to that property line. That's the only
Right, so-
open,
Paul, right now, those three condos basically make a wall. And
Yeah.
To combat that, on the east side of A1A, we have the breezeway rules that say, depending on the height of your building, you have to leave space in between the next buildings over, right? Which would be, because here, 50 feet between really tall buildings is not a lot.
yeah, we're talking about 25%.
What is Oceana?
We don't know the distance,
Uh-huh.
but we know it's more than 50 feet between the two.
It's,
You probably count parking spaces in front of every section.
It looks like that's 850 feet around the condos.
Okay.
You calculator up there?
Sure.
I can give you mine.
so breezeway is 60%. Breezeway is 60%, that's 531 feet of breezeway.
Yeah.
You want to do your calculation?
531 feet.
And we got 200 and
2 months.
maybe, generous.
That would be 531 feet of breezeway.
How do you guys feel about turning the buildings 90 degrees?
If they were built on the east side, right?
Yeah, if they were built on these. Do you know, Carl, why there's no breezeway on the west side? Just because this hasn't happened yet? Where anybody's putting up a big building and nobody bothered to think about it, or?
Well, no, I think that the thought is that the breezeway comes off the ocean, and that's the breezeway we're trying to protect. And so they limit the width and the breezeway on the ocean side. I don't know why it's that way. That's the way it
This
is.
is the, the nature preserve. It's the closest building to the east.
Yeah, it's always gonna be. I mean, without knowing, I'd certainly be willing for it to be, less intense than on the ocean itself.
Less, but still a
So,
requirement, there needs to be a requirement for that.
Yeah, Mike Jaffe, 1550 A1A Satellite Beach. There is no breezeway on the west side of A1A. There is a breezeway on the east side. You have a 40-foot setback on the east side. We're at a 100-foot setback on the west side.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we definitely got that part.
So when we laid the site plan out, based on that criteria and with, working with the city and the building official on that.
So, the question is, that maximum building length number, which would essentially be, all things being equal,
They could still put the buildings 50 feet away.
I was gonna say, well, I mean, the maximum building length of 200 feet is how the code is currently written, so we're suggesting or contemplating a change to it. And as far as what we've gone through, that's the only one that we still have outstanding. So, I would be, willing to entertain questions or opinions on the matter.
I don't feel compelled to change it myself. I don't feel compelled to change that requirement.
Specifically to not remove it, to leave it.
Right, to not remove
Leave it
it.
as
So leave it as is. I don't see an argument otherwise, but I'm willing to listen.
Why was it erased, Cole? Why was it crossed out?
We're back to the frontage now?
No.
Back to the building
length.
length of 200 feet?
It's because the conceptual plan as it is there, 224 feet. So that needs to be removed to have the conceptual plan as written. That's why.
What you're suggesting, yes.
Carl, is this the only property that has a 200-foot width limitation on the west side of A1A?
On, yeah, the west side of 208, there's no other development like this, yeah.
It's also the piece of, 85 feet high, it's probably the only one that can go 85 feet high also.
I could build another condo there, 2 of the 200 feet wide instead of the hotel, to make more money.
Maybe there's your answer.
Or we could build 398 units.
Or 798 units. Obviously, we have to.
I suppose we could get contentious about it.
Or you could build 2 condos.
Is there public comment after this one?
Actually, yes. This is a separate agenda item, so we will entertain public comments. I'm all for it now. We are really only on the single issue. So you're welcome to comment on any of the other ones, but this is really, it looks like the only thing that we're not in agreement of here, at least.
Yeah. So.
Again, I'm sorry saying it again.
Yep,
just because
that's fine.
of the-
Sandra Sullivan, South Patrick Shores. So I want to go back to the PUD 3 as laid out was a protection for the developer in concept, but also for residents of the area. And so it acts that way. So it's concerning to come here and see a lot of changes being made when we felt like 200 feet acted like a degree of protection. So that, I understand about changing you're going more conservative basically on the single family. But on this, the 200 feet acts as a limitation, and that feels good. As well as it was in here that a maximum of 85 feet was 7 stories. Now, you can have buildings that have vaulted ceilings and whatnot, but the 7 stories was laid out. And that was a protection for residents because it's in here. I don't think that should leave. And I also want to say regarding the breezeway, when you're talking about that, the PUD also says maximum lot coverage of 60%. Now, what that means is when it says lot, earlier in the text, it refers to that as being per acre, 100 feet by 100 feet. And so when you develop that building, those in between the buildings, effectively that lot coverage is 60 feet, that's going to give you at least 40% of each lot is going to be open space, which will give you what you were talking about with your breezeway or other open area. I also want to ask you one other question. And This is the ordinance that was just before this one. It was part of the PUD 3, but it's ordinance 876. And it says, any PUD submitted for approval shall be consistent with the provisions of the city's comprehensive plan, this chapter, and all land development regulations of the city. That means when you look at the comprehensive plan, it says you have to have a LOS of C or better on A1A and the roads coming in, which we don't have right now. So I'll bring that back up again. The second thing is it also has a charter. So does this have to correspond to the new rules, the charter, which was voted in some years ago, after this? And since it says it has to conform, be consistent with the land development regulations of the city, which would include the charter that's there. So that's a question I think that needs to be put forth to the attorneys of the city, and to find out whether that plays a part. And lastly, I would say, this is 398 units, and that's in total, whether that includes the hotel units or not, that's total units. And I would say, if you look at the hotel, everybody's focused on the condos being a little bit more than the 200 feet, but the hotel is a lot longer than 200 feet, and that's under the purview of the 200 feet in that PUD 3.
Thank you. So, again, coming back to the maximum building height, 200 feet, we are making a recommendation here. This is, we're aiming to make a recommendation.
Is it possible to step over public comment?
I'm sorry, yeah, absolutely, sorry if I wasn't clear, yeah. Just come up, state your name, and then,
My name is Matt Fleming. I live at 1777 A1A. I guess my recommendation to the board would be simply that overwhelmingly people in Satellite Beach are just anti-large development. If you go around and talk to people and just ask them, hey, do you want more condominiums in Satellite Beach? People are like, no. People are very angry about what happened with Oceana, whether that was right or wrong. So my advice would be to take that into consideration, and when making recommendations, which you guys have to do, I would say the smart thing to do would be to seek to minimize the development as opposed to seeing how much can we add to it. Because if you're working and trying to add as much as possible to 27 acres, where you're talking about having, I guess, 600 habitable units, even though it's only permitted for 398, we're calling a hotel a commercial property. People are paying attention to this, and it's all being recorded and documented, and I believe there are lots of people preparing to disseminate all that information. The developer that bought the property has a prolific history, if you look at him, of being involved in shady dealings. Whether he was ever found guilty or not, I don't know. My point is, to take all of those things into consideration, because I know the residents of this town. I've lived here for 23 years. We're not happy about it. In conjunction with raising building heights on the west side of A1A because of flooding concerns, which is insane because that's the highest part of the island. People recognize what's going on. So just take that with you and consider it in making your recommendations. Thank you.
One question. Gary Hilliard, a Montecito resident. Just out of curiosity, who's going to maintain the streets in the development? Is it the city with the streets and the street light, or the developer?
you mean on like Shearwater Parkway?
No, inside the development, those streets inside the development. Is the city going to maintain that and the street lights?
No.
Okay, so
It's part of CDD.
what do you mean it's part of the CDD?
He's saying it's part of CDD or not,
The
same CDBG.
It's the same.
That is part of funds.
So it's all done by bond.
So Montecito's gonna take care of that?
We'll receive monies for that too.
So but that's the answer, the city's not gonna maintain it?
Right, no, as he's indicating, he's part of the Montecito, what I guess you call it, the district. And that would be true whether it was this particular concept or whether it was just all residents.
I'm going to ask a student question. Dale, Davis, CRA resident. Can you explain to me why we didn't do this first and then the conceptual plan?
Because if we didn't want the conceptual plan, we wouldn't have had to go through this.
Okay. And the other question is, should we have legal representation here tonight from the city?
Well, bear in mind that, like, again, we're only making a recommendation, so anything that we, decide, which again, we're not deciding, we're making a recommendation, that it's going to have to go through review, both legal review, the city council is going to review it as well, for all those things, so.
Will it come back to you guys, or are you done with
The
this?
city council approves it, we don't.
Once you get done with this tonight, it's going to city council?
Yeah, and it can come back to us. They certainly have done that in the past, where they ask us to make revised recommendations based on new information. Typically, they wouldn't just send back the same thing and say, try again, because we're here to offer our recommendation. We're not actually approving code changes. We don't have that authority to do that.
Right.
So our job is to take the comments we're getting from the public and to think these things through and consult with staff to make the best recommendation, to make their job hopefully a little bit easier, but also to give an additional round of public comment and an additional give and take with the developer and all that to say, okay, these are the things that so far everything is looking good. It's just one issue that we're contemplating right now. So to give the indication of whether it's worth putting additional resources into this plan or whether it's not. But yeah, ultimately it's just a recommendation to the city council, and there's also an opportunity to have that discussion with them. But as far as legal review and things like that, that would all happen as part of that city council review. It's another reason why we do this here, so that can start in tandem with city council reviewing it, so that if there is any red flags, if there are any problems that are brought up by someone else along the way. Again, this is staff's best recommendation based on the plan. It's not every authority that is approving this. This is just Satellite Beach too, so there's going to be additional review by FDOT, St. John's Water.
Right, I understand that part, and then we will go through additional meetings with, regarding St. John's and DOT and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you had mentioned earlier that prior to voting on the previous issue, that maybe you needed a little more time to look over this information, and I don't disagree with that statement. This is a big deal, okay? And, decisions, if you're telling me after what you just voted on and what you're going to be voting on, this board is finished with their responsibility pertaining to the PUD3. Am I correct on that?
With this particular conceptual plan?
Yes, with that conceptual plan.
Yeah.
Now, if we go into some other type of plan, and I guess the reason why I'm asking you this, because you are aware how many times I came before this board pertaining to the coastal construction control line, okay? And I was just curious to see if that process would happen with this particular issue as the process goes along, because when it comes to a conceptual plan, what's the next stage of it called? I know you're an architect, so you probably understand this.
Well, they'll do it.
After you do the conceptual plan.
They've got to get a conceptual plan that meets all these requirements.
Right. Okay. And then the next stage is going through DOT, St. John's and all that other stuff?
They'll have their engineering.
Excuse me?
They're doing their engineering, they'll get their
product.
Okay.
The approved site
Yeah.
plan.
Okay.
And that's when you'll have literally dimensions on everything.
And you guys are not gonna be involved in that?
We wouldn't need to be unless there was a dramatic deviation from this concept. And by that, I mean an extra building, one less building, and, you know, an extra condo instead of a hotel, something larger along those lines. However, that would also be up to city council to say, like, they think it's essentially, you know, fundamentally the same plan, so they can always choose to consult us.
Right.
That's
You're an advisory
their right.
board. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what you're here for, is to advise staff and city council as far as that's concerned. And it would be appreciated if the citizens of the community would actually have access to these plans, okay? Other than some citizens coming in and taking pictures of it with their cell phone and putting it on social media for people to look at. There wasn't a whole lot of information when I looked at the agenda on Sunday night. There was no packet. And I think today, when I looked again, there was no packet either. So this additional information that was put out here, I thank staff for doing that, but truly would appreciate having that information on the website. And you know what? Let us make copies of it. Why spend the money of, you know, I mean, I know you still have to do that, but that's what I normally do, is I make my own copies, or I put it on my, you know, my cell phone. So, you know, it's just something to think about going
Can I address
forward.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dale.
Yeah.
I can just address why I can't put the whole packet on the website. That's because it's not ADA compliant, and we just were sued.
Oh.
So unless everything can be ADA compliant, we can't put it on the website. But it is available in our office.
So let me ask you this, these two documents that you printed up, you're telling me that these were not ADA compliant?
Those, the agenda packet is
Is
for.
ADA,
Yes.
but these are not. They were not on the website.
Anything with maps or any type of pictures.
There was no maps in here.
Yes.
No,
So
they weren't
now,
ADA.
because of that, we just put the agenda on, everything else is available.
Okay.
Really quickly, Dan Willamine, Cherish Park, I just want to address what Dale just brought up. If it's unfeasible to put it on the website, is it possible to make like a Dropbox or a Google Drive or something, where you can offload these PDFs to for the residents?
Worth considering.
I think, my understanding is unless it can be interpreted by a Braille machine, they cannot put it where you'd have to come into the office and specially request it. That's my understanding. Because if they put it on a website or a Dropbox, it's not available to everybody, and, you know, someone with disability, you're not providing that information to them. That's my understanding of it.
So in order to get this information out to the public, the citizens are still going to have to come to City Hall, take pictures, and put it on social
I believe
media?
so.
For the time being.
But yeah, for the time being. That's my understanding.
So, back to our one remaining issue, yeah. Have any additional thoughts on that? Just leaving the code as written
200
or
feet?
make it, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Rebecca. I don't see any relevance to taking it out.
Well, then we have to clarify between multifamily and commercial, or apply it to all of them, which.
Well, okay, so we were talking about just the
I'm
multifamily.
saying, if we leave the code as is, right? Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it applies to all of them.
It has that for multi-family, though, it doesn't talk about commercial.
Right.
As long as, because, you know, obviously, applying it to the hotel renders that, you know.
Yeah, no, that won't, so there's nothing to follow of the hotel if we do not, unless we put it in there.
But for this specific project, the problem is not the length of the building, it's the amount or lack of breezeway that those three buildings create.
That's exactly right.
Right. There's no breezeway requirement here, so the only thing we have that we can
Okay.
limit is the length of the
I
building.
just want to make it clear.
Right. There's no breezeway required.
Yeah, even at 200 feet, that would be dramatically reduced.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, have you spoken on this issue yet?
No, but you said something that I don't understand. If the PE3 document specifies that all the buildings are not going to be longer than 200, and you add a hotel.
It doesn't specify that.
No, it
only
does.
specifies, no, it doesn't. It only specifies that for multifamily residents. It doesn't specify that for commercial property.
But when that PUD3 document was created, there was no commercial in it. So you're adding commercial, but then you're saying we can just do whatever we want for that commercial property.
No, we're just saying that there's no breezeway requirements.
No, we're
on the
not
west
talking
side
about
of A1.
breezeway, we're talking about the length of the building. We thought as residents that PUD3 was protecting residents because the buildings were limited to,
Nobody's recommended that limitation be lifted.
so it would not be lifted for the hotel.
No, it does not
So
apply.
it would still be 200, no, but so you're saying an exception for the hotel.
But the hotel is not a multifamily residence, that's why it does not apply.
But the PUD3 did not include commercial.
It has.
So why, if you're gonna add commercial to it, why shouldn't you include the intent of the PUD3, which was a building not longer than 200
Well,
feet?
again, as we indicated back in 2015, when we had this discussion, we did indicate that commercial was a viable use for it, and it's up to 5% of the entire land can be used for commercial purposes.
You mean like this meeting where you don't notify the public, and so people don't know about the meetings?
It's a matter of public record.
Only to check the website the night before.
Miss, that's not our responsibility. Serving on this board, it's not our responsibility.
Nor is that accurate. So, coming back to it, I think we have everything other than just the one item. Both seem to be in agreement. Do you have a motion for recommending? Please, ma'am, we gave you the opportunity to talk, please.
So is this all or nothing? Is that how we?
No, we move with any revisions, so I already have we have a couple of the revisions, so if you want to move forward with a recommendation, what I suggest we do is call out those exceptions while you're actually stating it. I'm more than happy to help you do that, but it would be, from what you're saying.
All right, so I'll make a motion to approve, not removing the maximum building of 200 feet.
Let me suggest.
Yes, please.
Make a recommendation to approve the code changes as written with the exception of.
I make a motion to approve as written with the exception of the maximum building length of 200 feet and the commercial uses under item 4, not striking out the uses such as that sentence.
What's the point?
Is that clear for you?
You guys just ignore everything else.
Please. Did you understand what she just said, with those two changes? Okay, great. So, everybody else understands?
Yes.
How it's written?
And I'll second it.
Go ahead.
Okay, Paul? Marchese?
Yes.
Alan Lamott?
Yes.
Peter.
And David.
And David Delighton.
Aye. Thank you for getting through that. We have one more agenda item for the approval of the minutes from the August 19th, 2019 meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes as written, or any discussion changes that you can identify.
Motion to approve?
That was Peter. Maybe you make a motion to approve the minutes.
Back away here.
So have a second?
I'll second.
Alan Lamott, second.
Okay. Rebecca Van Meter?
Aye.
Paul Marchese?
Aye.
Alan Lamott? Peter?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Motion
Thank you very much, everybody. Our next meeting is scheduled for November 18th. Be sure to let staff know if you don't anticipate being available. Otherwise, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.